in a way, you've got kind of two, let's say, madhab. This question always comes up: how do I study fiqh, from hadith directly or from the madhahib? That used to come up in the past, right? Okay, I just take a book Bulugh and I study fiqh from there. I don't need to study a madhab, right? Aqwal al-rijal and those type of statements. Or I study a madhab and I use Bulugh for the evidences for that madhab and stuff like that. There's always this kind of two ways in which you can study fiqh, isn't there?
Like, a lot of people think that I'm totally against one studying through the hadith way. I'm actually not.
Yeah.
Right? And as the mashayikh, they mention, taking the madhab route, it just summarizes your path in understanding fiqh. It really, really does.
Summarizes, makes it shorter, easier.
Yeah. I don't like it when somebody says, when you tell him, akhi, maybe follow one of the, or study one of the madhahib, right?
Yeah.
He says, we're going to follow the Quran and the Sunnah.
Yeah.
Like, are the four madhahib based on Torah and the Injil? The Gospel and the Bible?
No.
For somebody to say that?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, this has gone through so many stages. Like, even if you look at the madhab Imam Ahmad rahmatullah alayhi, on one mas'ala he may have 3 different positions.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, why does he have 3 different positions? Because he came across a hadith that was brought to his attention.
Yep.
Right? And because of that he may have changed his view.
Yeah.
Right? He tried to look at the different hadith and his students derived some of his views out from there, right? And he's an alim.
Yeah.
And alim's conclusions.
Yeah.
Right? And the same with all the other madhahib as well. So the way I look at madhahib as like an exam board. You know, you have AQA and EXO, right? It just basically gives you the tools to be able to understand what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. Even Shaykhuna Salih ibn Abdullah ibn Hamad al-Husaymi has a line of poetry where he says, وَتَجْعَلِ الْمُتُونَ لِلتَّفْقِيهِ وَسِيلَةً لِرُتْبَةِ الْفَقِيهِ. It's a wasila.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a wasila, it's a means to reach that level of becoming a faqih. Even if we look at Ibn Taymiyyah, what was he?
He was
Hanbali,
right? Yeah.
Ibn Abdul Barr, Maliki,
Yeah.
Imam al-Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi, Shafi'i.
Yeah.
Right? And they reached a very high level in fiqh.
You have to mention Hanafi Shaykh before everyone says they were anti-Hanafi.
Oh, no, we're not against Imam Abu Hanifa.
We're not against,
Imam Abu Hanifa is the oldest out of all of them.
Yeah.
By the way, on my iPad I have a lecture that I want to conduct, some of the virtues of Imam Abu Hanifa.
MashaAllah,
and all the times when Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi made good mention of Imam Abu Hanifa.
Yeah.
Actually got on my phone, actually started collecting all the...
Because in this regard, I remember, this is ages ago actually, there was a couple of books which, those that are, let's say, really strong Ali Hadith or Ahl al-Hadith adherents used to basically push to show that Imam Abu Hanifa is not even from, almost as if he's not even from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. What's the name of the book? Do you know it?
It's called Nashr al-Sahifa.
Yeah.
By Sheikh Muqbil.
I think so. He's by Sheikh Muqbil, his hadith.
He
took it from, and there's another, the statements of the scholars at the time that were critical of
I think that's a book
Abu
that needs
Hanifa. To be reviewed and revised.
And eliminated.
Okay. Yeah.
Needs to be get rid of completely.
Yeah.
And I think Sheikh Muqbil, may Allah Azza wa Jalla have mercy upon him, it was one of the things that he erred in. And just to kind of like put this out as someone who, graduated from his institute, I don't think there was any, if anything, it damaged
the da'wah.
The da'wah more than anything else.
Yeah.
It really did.
Yeah.
Right.
Because what happens today, people will say, for example,
use that against us.
Like, they use it against.
I don't believe in it at all.
There's a book by
there's an explanation for everything that was mentioned in that book, I believe. I genuinely believe.
Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah has a book, doesn't he? Raf al-Malam. So that's about removing the blame from the imam in the issues where they may have made mistakes and stuff like that. He's making...
It makes you more tolerant reading that book.
Yeah.
And he's doing this defending the four madhahib.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It reminds me also of a statement of Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah when he said, كُلَّمَا اتَّسَعَ عِلْمُهُ اتَّسَعَتْ رَحْمَتُهُ. The more one increases in knowledge, the more this person will become more merciful. The more one will become more merciful.
Yeah.
Right? It becomes more open-minded.
Yep.
And anyways, going back to the question that you had, right? It's just a very long path.
Yeah.
When taking the route of a hadith.
Yeah.
When you have these mashayikh, these ulama, that have simplified it for you and they put it in a very simple text, right? I'll give you an example. Someone asks me now, can you touch your private part? Right? What do I tell him? If you're studying Bulugh al-Maram or you've taught Bulugh al-Maram, you're going to go into the full khilaf. As a beginning student of knowledge, you just basically need to know one view. Otherwise, it'll become extremely overwhelming. Like in Bulugh al-Maram, right? You have the hadith of Tariq ibn Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. قال رجل يمس ذكره في الصلاة أعليه الوضوء. someone who touches his private part, does he need to repeat his wudu? The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, لا إنما هو بضعة منك أخرجه الخمسة. Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, touching your private part is like touching any other part of your body. It's like touching your elbow, meaning it doesn't break it. The hadith right after it, right? And this is the hadith that the Hanabila took. And Massa ذكره فليتوضأ. Right? Whoever touches his private part, then let him go and make wudu. Okay, it's already getting complex now for this beginning student of knowledge. By the way, there's another hadith as well. Hadith Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, and that must be mentioned. Right? من أفضى بيده إلى فرجه ليس دونه حجاب فقد وجب عليه الوضوء. Whoever makes direct contact using his hand, right, with his private part, then the wudu has become wajib. The Maliki, they'll take this hadith, the first hadith that we mentioned, and I believe this is the position of Ibn Uthaymeen rahmatullahi alayhi, saying we can try and reconcile between the evidences and say that if it's done with shahwa, if you touch your private part with lust, or if you touch your private part, ala kulli hal, some reasons that they have. The Shafi'i and the Hanabila, they take this second hadith, right, and it's going back and forth. The Hanabila, they say no, this has been abrogated. And the reason why it's abrogated, is it possible now that we say that touching your private part is like touching any other part of your body? When you hear the Messenger ﷺ hadith of Abu Hurairah is saying, wudu has become wajib. His Prophet is like, beginning student of knowledge, now you've gone into abrogation confused. As well.
You've gone into lots of issues.
Issues as well, right? And then the hadith guy might turn around and say that some of these hadith are actually weak. Getting deeper now.
You now need the science of hadith as well.
See what I'm saying? It's getting too much for him. What you need as a student of knowledge when you start studying fiqh is take one view, act upon it so the ilm sticks, which is the most important thing. And then maybe the next time round, go into it a little bit more deeper. It just makes life so much more easier.
What about people, like there's another movement now which is kind of, in a way, I guess the Hanafis might be looking at Salafis thinking, you guys used to say, you guys make taqleed of madhahib and madhab, and now you're doing the same thing, and you Salafis in the Hanbali madhab specifically. What's your take on that? I.e., there been a new kind of movement of madhabism amongst the Salafis, specifically sticking to the either Hanbali or the Shafi madhab?
Or has that always been around?
Well, in the UK, in the Salafi, in the Salafi, but not in the Mamlaka. Of course, in the past.
Students, right?
Of course, they used to, but in the UK it would be considered something potentially new. Especially if, for example,
because the Mashayikh in Saudi Arabia have always been
100%.
And they've never been against the Madhahib.
100%. Right? I know that, you know that, but obviously in the UK it's a bit of a bubble sometimes.
Even in Damaj, even though they're very staunch, like we're not going to study books of the Madhahib, when you look at the explanation of the Mashayikh there, on Bulugh al-Maram, they're mentioning Imam Hanifa, they're mentioning Al-Imam Al-Shafi rahmatullahi alayhi and other than them. So they mention them. I'll tell you something like that happened to me, right? I think this experiences students can benefit from. I remember when I was in Damaj, I just wanted to know the pillars of Salah. Wallahi al-Azim. I just woke up one day, I was like, you know what? I think I need to study now what the pillars are. I heard something along the lines of that. I asked 3 different brothers. Every single one of them gave me a different answer. And I'm relatively new now to fiqh. Very new. I just finished the Quran now. I'm only now beginning to study different sciences, right? I go up to a brother, he tells me 13. Another brother, 15. The other, I think, said 16. Like, who do I follow? I remember that day, subhanAllah, I walked into the maktaba and there was the kitab of Shaykh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, Shurut al-Salat wa Arkana wa Wajibatuha, which is based on Hanbali fiqh. Right? And I was like, oh, okay. He gives a number here. And then the shurut has a number, the conditions. And then the wajibat, okay. And then you come to the salah, it has a number of pillars. And I was like, this is very, very simple. And he's a sheikh that everybody takes from. And let me just study this. And I took it and I just started kind of like going through that notes, by myself.
Good.
That's and later on, alhamdulillah, I began to actually realize why it's this and why it's that. So it just makes life so much more easier for you. And akhi, Sheikh, what the reality is, those who end up taking this path, they just eventually end up blind following Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, Sheikh Ibn Baz, Sheikh Al-Albani, Sheikh Muqbil, or Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, or they'll go on Islam Q&A and they try to find an answer. I'm not saying this as an insult or anything like that, but this is exactly what ends up happening. If memorizing Zad al-Mustaqni' is something difficult, they say it has 3,000 masail, something like that, right? And imagine now every mas'ala you're going into the difference of opinion.
Yeah, of course, it's not going to.
It becomes too much. You're not going to go past Kitab al-Tahara.
100%. I mean, one of the things that I kind of benefit from was the talk by Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh the methodology of student of knowledge.
Yeah.
When I heard that one talk, that was it. I had a tariqah and I followed it. I didn't before that time. I was like, do I do it via hadith? Do I do it via fiqh? Who do I listen to? Someone will quote one scholar, someone will quote another scholar. In the end, once I heard that tape, that was it. I went forward. And on a side note, the first book I actually studied in fiqh was Shurut al-Salah, and the teacher was Sheikh Abdul al-Abad, who was a muhaddith, teaching a book on fiqh of the Hanbali fiqh, generally speaking. Although it's fiqh because it mentions evidences in it as well. A question that comes up, and it's not really significant, but there's two things. When you study a madhab, usually in a Muslim country, you study the madhab of that country, right? So if you're in, for example, Saudi, it's Hanbali madhab, and you're going to end up studying Hanbali fiqh. If you're in, for example, Egypt, you're either going to study Shafi'i fiqh or Hanafi fiqh, right? Somalia, Shafi'i fiqh, right? Because that's a country. Okay, we're in the UK. What madhab is the UK?
I think we do have a madhab.
Do we?
Do we not?
What is it? What's the madhab of the UK? Hanbali. I'll tell you something interesting about
Hanafi. There's more
thank you.
Established.
Thank you. That's
institutions that teach Hanafi.
Hanafi fiqh was a madhab in the UK, but by the blessing of the Islamic University of Medina, it became Hanbali. And this was when I say it became Hanbali, this is a complaint you'd hear from people. For example, I remember one of the students in Africa saying that the mashaykh, the elders there, are complaining. He says that our madhab is Maliki. But you graduates of the Islamic University of Medina, you're coming and teaching us Manhaj al-Salikin, Hanbalizing everyone. Teaching us Manhaj al-Salikin, teaching us fiqh on the Hanbali madhab. But that's how it's always been. The Hanafi fiqh became strong because of what? Ottoman Empire, right? Yeah. So where there's influence, that's what gets spread. The Hanbali madhab was one of the smallest madhabs, to the point that if you read some of the books of fiqh in the past, they rarely mention the Hanbali position on stuff. They mentioned Shafi'i. They mentioned Malik.
It wasn't even considered to be like a fiqhi madhab.
It wasn't considered to be a fiqhi madhab.
Bidayat al-Mujtahid ibn Rushd.
He doesn't mention it.
He just mentions him as a scholar of hadith.
Yeah.
Right? When the Sheikh Abdul Zahim came along, he done tahqiq of it.
Yeah.
And he started editing it. Adding the positions that he had.
So the point being, the Hanbali madhab was a very small madhab. But today, if someone says, what madhab should you study? Everyone says, study the Hanbali madhab. It's the strongest, right? Well, not that I agree with that position, generally speaking. I think all the madhab have their...
hadith orientated.
It's more hadith orientated. So strongest in terms of it being closest to the athar, right?
The athar, yeah. Because Musnad of Imam Ahmad,
it's huge.
Do you have it? Yeah?
No, I don't have it. It's too big for my library. If someone wants to donate it, then you can do, but we don't have space. We'd have to buy a bookshelf as well to hold it. Yeah. But on that note, on the madhab, right? What's the difference? Just as a quick benefit for students of knowledge, in your experience studying Bidat al-Mujtahid and stuff like that, how would you differentiate between the madhab, the miza of each of the different madhab, if you can, or of the ones that you've kind of looked into? Because I hate the question. Someone says, "What's the strongest madhab?" I look at them and I think, "Why are you asking that question for?" Each madhab has a miza, right? Basically, you might have a different opinion. Fine, mention it. Away you go. It's the camera's yours. What do you think? What's the miza of each madhab?
I'm going to say this, and it's going to excite a lot of brothers.
Go ahead.
The madhab of Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi, because of course Imam Shafi'i was a lughawi, he was also an usuli, right? A risala.
Yeah. The first book on usul al-fiqh is by Imam Shafi'i.
You can see that it's much more organized in perspective of usul al-fiqh.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the strongest madhab.
Like rooting, behind the camera.
You sold out the jam there. Your Hanbali position. Take back the Shahada. I dare you promote the Shafi'i,
And as for the Hanafi,
all the Somalis are happy with you now. MashaAllah, a lot of brothers. Go on.
And as for the Hanbali madhab, as you mentioned, like, you'll always find a hadith.
Yeah.
Always find a hadith.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like filled with a hadith.
Yeah.
And it's not surprising because of the great hadith imam that Imam Ahmad rahmatullahi alayhi was.
Yeah. Hanafi madhab, what's the miza of the Hanafi madhab, in your opinion, if you've done
I personally haven't studied Hanafi madhab.
Yeah.
I can't necessarily judge that.
What about it being a madhab of ra'i, of being opinions, meaning they do a lot of
one thing I will say about the madhab Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi was the first out of the four madhahib.
Yeah.
He brought out a madhab with the very little resources that he had.
Yeah.
And wallahi, I've come across some of the positions like where Imam Abu Hanifa talks about praying in the air.
Yeah.
Is that something that is relevant in today's day and age? Of course it is. You pray in the air, right?
Yeah.
And you are
on the plane and
stuff
stuff like
on the plane.
Yeah.
Right? So he would speak about certain things you think, like, how on earth did he even think about that?
Yeah.
But in today's day and age, it's very, very relevant.
Yeah. And it's yeah.
And
People criticised it at the
yeah,
time.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a lot of criticisms, but it's mental exercise.
He didn't have many resources, and there were a lot of wadda'in around, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people who would try to maybe attribute things to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah.
And sometimes people say that Imam Abu Hanifa would reject the hadith.
Yeah.
Would he reject the hadith based on him just rejecting it?
To follow opinion based and no, of course not.
And maybe he would reject it because somebody in the chain of narration or someone who was narrating this hadith was a compulsive liar. Or someone who you can't take religion from. Not because he was rejecting the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah, that's the misconception that I guess some people
I don't believe that Imam Abu Hanifa would do something like that. I really don't.
No.
Right? He didn't have much resources compared to everybody else.
I guess there's another very important point, which is how they all benefited from one another. They're all students of either the Atba' Tabi'in or the Tabi'in, and then it goes further down. Then you're going to have students of Imam Abu Hanifa, his two students, Muhammad ibn Hassan, and then you have
Malik. Silsila al-Dhahabi, they call it the golden chain. He took knowledge from Nafi'. And Nafi' was Mawla Abdul ibn Umar, companion. Right? Not many people know about Nafi'. However, subhanAllah, they say about Imam Malik, he was the only one attending his gatherings in the Prophet
subhanAllah.
And he continued giving da'wah.
Wow.
He may not necessarily have become known to the people, but his knowledge was carried by Imam Malik,
and that's it, spread around the world. Yeah, it's spread.
So Allah, I really appreciate the four madahib, we really do.
Also, it highlights the importance of the students, the benefit of the students in spreading the knowledge of their imams or their teachers. It's not a case of, you're just a student, but you're a student to take the knowledge, act upon it, and also share it with others as well.
One thing I think is worth mentioning before we